So there's this discourse. Oh God, what a terrible way to start this essay. Hold on. Persona 4 is a game that released on. Wait, no, that's even worse. Hey, Reddit Nation, remember Persona 4? That game that looked at the sheer majesty of Persona 3 and went, oh, the combat's a bit rough and there's like only one dungeon. We can do better than that. And now it's one of the most popular titles in the series. It's a story about seeking the truth, even if it's a truth that hashtag society isn't comfortable hearing, that you alone can pierce through the thick fog of meaningless consumption and save the town from a sinister serial killer. Wowza. But apparently, some naysayers are out there complaining that the game seems to be, bad about queer people. Is this the woke mind virus at play? Is Persona 4, a game where you spend a lot of time helping your cop uncle be a good cop, even if it means leaving you to care for his 6-year-old daughter so he can hassle some teens at night, possibly be getting canceled? By the media? Who knows? Anyway, here's why Persona 4 is maybe the worst in the series. Part 1. Balance. So, the urge here is to talk about what I like about the game to help provide a sense of balance, because there are definitely things about Persona 4 that are very enjoyable. The combat is definitely more fun than Persona 3, arguably the best game in the series. In a lot of ways. The music is very bouncy and fun. I even like the beat-to-beat plot of the game. Your story begins with you, main character boy, moving from the big city to a small town just before a strange murder happens. A couple days later, another murder happens, and this time, it's your newly acquainted friend Yosuke's crush who dies. You, Yosuke, your friends Chie and Yukiko all end up banding together to try to solve these bizarre mysteries as more locals from the town start to disappear, with a mysterious culprit pushing them into a bizarre world by pushing them physically through a television that you and your friends have access to. It's a fun plot, it's a fun story to summarize, and it can feel fun to consider as a whole. Every step of the way you feel like you're solving something, you're picking apart the strange thing, or figuring out more about the people who've been kidnapped, and the actual ending of the game pits everything, even the game's system dialogue against you, is honestly fantastic on like a pure, like, structural levels. So, like, what's the problem? I'm calling this maybe the worst game in the series, including Persona 1, a game that, even when it was remade, had technical issues all over it. Half the information you're provided is straight up lies, and the game relishes in making you do increasing amounts of complete nonsense for a story that's relatively simple. I'm also calling Persona 4 maybe the worst, having played literally maybe a few dungeons in Eternal Punishment before deciding arbitrarily that I should learn Japanese to play the remake version in its native language, pero yo nihongo ga hanasemasen, ne? I got off topic. The issue that really lives at the heart of this endless discourse about Persona 4 is actually kind of tricky to unpack, and a lot of that has happened as kind of a direct result of the central thrust of the story. See, there's actually a lot more to the plot than what I described. See, the thing about the TV world is that when someone is thrown in there, they generate a shadow, a dark reflection of their innermost desires, the parts of themselves they were keeping hidden. That shadow grows and becomes aggressive, violent, and ultimately will devour the person, leaving their body in the real world. This is why the first time you go in, you find a room with the scarf seen on the first victim's body fashioned into a noose, or why you go to the doomed commercial area on the TV to hear Saki Konishi, that's Yosuke's crush, admit that she found him to be a real jerk and kind of hated him, which caused Yosuke's shadow to spin out of control, revealing that he finds a small town boring and horrible, and Yosuke can't admit this, so he yells, the shadow goes haywire, and you have to defeat it so that Yosuke can accept this part of him, which in turn converts his shadow into a persona. Did you like that? Because the same thing happens with every character in Persona 4 that runs into this problem. Chie, Yukiko, Kanji, Rise, Teddie, Mitsuo, Naoto, and Namatame all have this happen to them, more or less, with Mitsuo and Namatame not being able to accept themselves afterwards anyway, sort of, and with Nanako going into the TV world, but she's a kid and has no inner life she's repressing, even though that's... Well, we'll get into that. The world of Persona 4 progresses through the psyche of a diverse cast of characters. Who they are, who they present themselves as, what they're hiding, these questions hold up the bulk of the story. And this construction helps P4 with maybe its least complicated issue, in that the story takes place over an entire calendar year, starting in April and ending in March of next year. And the story is also a murder mystery, and maybe I'm not an expert in the genre, but it can be a difficult thing to maintain the tension and intrigue of a murder mystery if you're going more or less day by day through an entire year. The progression of the mystery itself can't happen too quickly because the game's mechanics demand that you need to spend the entire calendar year in-game solving it. As a result, A lot of time is spent going through each new character's TV world dungeon, learning about their insecurities, rescuing them, asking them who did this, only for them to tell you that they don't know anything. The real core of like the struggle here is that in a broad sense there's nothing really wrong with Persona 4. The plot is there, the mystery when it's ready to reveal itself has some fun twists and turns, the music is good, the gameplay is fun, it's pretty much there, but when you start to poke around at it and think about what this game is trying to say, everything starts to rot from the inside out. And hey, as an aside, to the folks who really, really love Persona 4 and are out there dogpiling on relatively small accounts for being upset about the themes present in this title, maybe you should just stop watching now. It's okay for you to enjoy a perfectly superficial relationship with this game. I still enjoy the game myself, or at least parts of it, and if you're going to be really hung up about people being critical of this game, or like complain about people going on rants about it, or whatever, then go ahead, but I'm just trying to save you the trouble. Nothing I can say here is going to convince you of anything, so go forth and enjoy your life away from me, please. Part 2. What we want to see. A major theme introduced really, really early in the game is seeking the truth. You're given a speech by a shadowy figure in your dreams on your first night here about how humans only see what they want to and are content to live in a thick fog that hides the truth from them. This works for the plot because the party comes to wrong conclusions multiple times, and the game more or less mechanically pushes you to figure out the truth of the situation, culminating in 2 big events, one of which has multiple avenues that can lead you into varying bad endings, and another event that diverges from the good ending and the true ending. Maybe I'll make a video about endings one day. Though if I did, I'd rather talk about Persona 1 than Persona 4. The point, though, is that misinformation, convenient lies, resting comfortably in the thick fog of consumption are kind of an underpinning presence in the story. In that it's there in the start, it shows up again a little with Teddie's shadow, again, a little with Mitsuo's shadow, and again more presently with Namatame before this theme kind of pushes to the forefront in tracking down the true killer. And then double pushes to the even more forefront with the true ending, not even to get into the P4 Golden Edition of shoving the Marie dungeon in between these two things. To deny its existence in the story is silly, but the fact that so much of the game is spent not thinking about it until it really comes back full swing in the last 3 or 4, if you're playing Golden Dungeons, in the game can be disorienting. Not because it's inherently bad to write stories like this, but the effect, in this case, makes a large part of the game feel mostly like you're spinning your wheels. It wouldn't be as much of an issue. In fact, Persona 5 follows a similar structure, but the premise of P4, hunting down a serial killer, feels like it's more or less here to mess with the important part of the game, doing all your, dating sim stuff. Speaking of which, let's talk about the dating sim stuff. I said this before in my P5 video, but one of the central issues in adapting Persona 3's dating sim mechanics into Persona 4 is balancing the tone and context. Look, Persona 3's big boss battles happen once a lunar cycle, and there's nothing you can do proactively to make this better or worse, or anything. You're stuck, trying to fill your days and nights to prepare as best you can. This makes the social sim parts work because what else are you going to do? Yeah, you have to keep living, keep building relationships with people, improving yourself, studying, because the JRPG element is tucked away in the dark hour. It's this secret double life that imposes itself on you. It builds these great moments of tension where tragedy befalls the party, and your only option is to keep going like nothing happened. People have complained that P3 can start to feel pretty empty as you quickly run out of things to do in the evening time slots, besides sleeping in, dungeon crawling, walking the dog. And you can agree or disagree with that as a criticism, but the tone really struggles in P4. You're pursuing a killer. You have people thrown into TV dungeons. You know this thing kills people. It literally kills 2 people. And the game has to basically strain its own rules to give you a time frame to rescue them, which is, for the majority of the dungeons, what you're doing. You rescue Yukiko, Kanjei, Rise, Naoto, and Nanako, and Marie in the golden version, but you have to do that in one day, so fair. I'm glad they listened to my criticisms from the future. But you can kind of just not do it right away. Wait around until it's a convenient day for you to save their lives. It's a mess, but it's only a mess because the game has introduced really high narrative stakes. Hey, I get it. I love Naive Camp. The farce of it could in itself be amusing, but It was preempted by the pretty visceral murder of Saki Konishi, a girl you sort of knew and sort of spoke to, a girl that was meaningful enough for Yosuke that he braved the unknown to seek answers. That the game can open with such a rough premise, and then your first dungeon and go,
Well, you need to get your strength back. Then you can tell her. Yuki-chan's normal. The shadows don't attack normal people. They only attack when the fog lifts here.
So Yukiko-san will be safe until then, right?
I'm positive.
well, you can let the victim stay in there for a few weeks if you need to talk to your basketball bro about problems with his family's legacy, or hang out with Yosuke while a friend he's known enough to have asked out in the past is in shadow hell. That's fine. The game is even conscious enough of this to make Chie unavailable to develop a social link with until Yukiko's rescued, which makes sense, but it couldn't conceive of an answer to this problem outside of having the Velvet Room duo tell you that it's okay to take your time through this. This is at the heart of the tone issues in Persona 4. Like, I think it's a fair point that the game obviously wants to play with mashing up lighthearted charm and the dark undercurrents of society, and we will get to society. But there's a kind of fundamental struggle in the execution, isn't there? You haven't made a story about a tragedy slowly consuming a town as our heroes seek desperately for the truth when you can only remember to consume the town in the third act abruptly, and you definitely haven't made the story if you have to break the game's internal logic in order to consume the town in the third act abruptly. After Nanako gets kidnapped and taken into the TV with a second fake murderer, Namatame, the party gets to decide his fate once they clear the dungeon, which, again, you can take a few weeks to do. She's just your 6-year-old cousin in Shadow Hell. Well, okay, this one's heaven, I got, fuck me. You can make a decision in one of the really good moments in the game that splits off into several endings. God, I gotta make that Persona 1 video. If you answered correctly and intuit that he's not the actual murderer and can calm your companions down enough to think things through, you can start to figure out the real killer. But that's also when the town gets enveloped in thick fog, seemingly responding for the first time to the actions of just your team, not the town as a whole. It's a good way to build tension. You have the game mechanic of fog creep into the real world like this, and it's ominous, and it feels like we're all building up to a big finale, but it only culminates now because you've gotten close to the end of the game. The divisions between these game phases feel so distinct. You're introduced to the core concept, you're meandered through a bunch of wacky set pieces, including a red herring murderer taking place in a Dragon Quest reference, I think. The stakes suddenly escalate when your little cousin is targeted, then the world warps around you as you find the true killer. Then several months pass, and you can finally seek out and fight the true ending boss, something that was made more palatable in the original version, made into extra months of content in Golden, as you also have to rescue Marie while having a fun winter episode. And can I just say that while we're here, I hate the big high school hijinks events in this game. Like, okay, so I didn't care for the bulk of them in Persona 3. I didn't like harassing women at the beach. Really hate the hot springs thing, but the way P3 is structured de-emphasizes the events as the focal points of the game. It's just too busy kind of unpacking itself and making you come to terms with the specific agonies of your party members to feel like you're mostly here to see Junpei be a public embarrassment. In contrast, because of Persona 4's efforts to make you more proactive, able to push through dungeons in one day if you want, it makes the plot feel more distant, as you're mostly just rushing through dungeons and getting a couple of days of your party all gathering at the food court to tell each other they have no idea what's going on. The result is that bigger set pieces, where everyone's together and spending time, become the more consistent element in the game, and that's not a great position to put in this game, because Part 3, the cast isn't great. I know this is maybe controversial, but you have to understand that before we can even reach talking about Persona 4's capacity to say anything about society, all these problems kind of interlock in weird ways, and part of this is built on the cast's shoulders. Part of the changes they made from P3 was de-emphasizing the presence of your party members in the main story, pushing their personal arcs through the game into optional side content. There's a fair argument to be made about the mechanics behind that. If you want any one of these party members' advanced personas, you should work on them. Dedicate your now much more precious time, until the Golden gave you like an extra month of free time, into their story so they, in turn, become better party members. It's a move that makes a lot of sense for improving the quality of the gameplay, but it comes at a pretty heavy narrative cost. See, a necessary result of this decision is that every party member except Teddie has a variable sense of progression, and the game has to account for someone who doesn't engage in any of their stories. So each party member in this game gets introduced, their core internal struggle revealed, they have a big confrontation with their shadow, grow to accept it as a part of themselves, and then slot into the party to remain a static fixture of themselves because the game can't know if they've changed. Let's take Yosuke. Which, as an aside, fuck Yosuke, but before we really get there, I will say that I actually do like his social link. It paints a much more sympathetic and complex image of his shitty teen as someone the rest of the town roundly rejects and hates because his father is destroying the local economy. They take out this kind of heavy, complex issue on him because it's easy to, and he bears a lot of disgruntled employees, people spamming his phone, mockery, derision, and his own insecurities because you, the only other person in town who came from a big city, have seamlessly integrated, become beloved by the people. Like, you were his one hope that he could depend on you also being an outcast, but no, the problem is him specifically. This is a great social link. It's the only time I really get this character and see behind his mean-spirited nature, and I can say that it is the only time because he's literally never like this ever again anywhere. Social link Yosuke and main story Yosuke are oil and water. Never can the two meet because what if you didn't give a shit about him and now you've reached the end game and you've just refused to progress his social link? Let's pick another example from P3 this time, Yukari. See, P3 does have party members with optional social links too, but the major difference is that these provide further insight on parts of the characters unexplored by the main story, and that works because the main story cares about exploring these characters. You can choose, if you want to learn about Yukari's struggles with her mom's means of coping with the loss of her husband, but even if you don't help her with that, Yukari has a growth and a trajectory in the story itself. She starts off a little hostile to Mitsuru, and you find out that it's because her father died working for Mitsuru's dad, that this incident was covered up, and that finding out the truth about his death and his final message to the world changes Yukari, her outlook on the world, her dynamic with the other party members, so you can have this less connected part of her story, but the character isn't hamstrung by being forced to kind of stay static, lest helping her grow as a person meaningfully changes the story. Now, here's the thing, Persona 4 isn't bad strictly because of this one decision, or really any one of its decisions in a vacuum. And in this case, you absolutely can have a cast of people that are pretty static through the main story that you can choose to delve into deeper on your own time, but that kind of needs something else to pick up the slack. Either the party has to be compelling on its own terms, or the main character has a lot of interesting things going on. I don't know. Something else has to be here. And since the main character of P4 is a silent protagonist you're supposed to kind of reflect yourself into, he can't really be super meaningful as his own character, at least not the way he's written. So to pick up the slack, we have... what? Are the party members of P4 engaging enough on their own terms to make the story feel satisfying? Well, obviously your mileage may vary, but I may have put the thumb on the scale with the title of this section, so... Okay. Look, I'm gonna do my best to be fair here. The Persona 4 cast is... okay. Individually, in their respective social links, the writing is interesting enough that they usually make each character feel compelling enough in isolation. If the game was entirely just the growth of these characters, I wouldn't really have as many problems with it, but the bulk of your time with the party is mired in the big social sequences, camping trips, beach episode, the time you're in a band in Persona 4 Golden for some reason. Persona 4 Golden expanded the game out, gave us more time with the cast, more of these sequences, and they all culminate in the same thing. The boys are kind of gross pigs to the girls, who in turn are weirdly hyper-competitive with each other, or there's a long-running gag about how none of them know how to cook, or the one time where it was both of those things. The times that we're together trying to solve mysteries and whatnots put the cast dynamic on the back foot. Oftentimes the dungeons are focused on the host character, because this is their time to have their arc in the story before they're relegated to side character, or in the case of Mitsuo, just leave the story more or less altogether. When the plot is moving, which again is one of the better parts of the game when we finally get to it, most of the cast are just there to reiterate things we know and lament not knowing the answer to things basically until Naoto joins the party, who then moves the investigation along single-handedly into the ending cluster of dungeons. The game's sense of its cast seems wildly inconsistent. Party members have 3 modes after gaining their personas. High school wacky mode, a party member in a story that's no longer about them and they have very little sway in, or social link for you to indulge in at your leisure. And these modes basically never intersect. Like, okay, a lot of these issues are still in Persona 5, sure, but at least they do you the dignity of having set pieces in the plot sections that your party members are actually specialized to work with. Makoto occasionally runs misdirection on her sister. Futaba hacks the mainframe. Ryuji runs, that one time with, like, the boat. He runs that one time. What does Yosuke contribute to the story? His personal journey, his arc, is steeped in tragedy. The girl he likes dies at the start of the game, setting him off on this adventure. Find Saki's murderer. He's forced to confront his kind of nasty personality in the Midnight Channel, and he's given the power to enter this world and fight the shadows and save people. He then spends the next 5 dungeons basically working out a bunch of theories that don't add up in conjunction with everyone else in the party, kind of collectively drawing false conclusions, asking each new party member if they've learned anything, to which they all say no until Naoto. He starts the game seeking revenge for Saki, and that is the only note he has in this. The only thing he cares about when it's time to confront Mitsuo, Namatame, and Adachi, and worst of all, this is about as deep as your party gets with this. Teddie, the shadow who wanted to be part of the human world so much that he reshaped himself into a friendly bear that houses a twink inside it like the world's least normal Matryoshka doll, is deeply connected to the plot. The Midnight Channel, the fog, all of these things have like huge sweeping consequences to his world, and his motivations are... what? He opens the story seeking an end to the disruptions in his world. See, people are getting thrown into the TV and it changes the world, makes other shadows restless and all that. And that kind of just drifts to the wayside because like half the game is spent kind of just building the rest of the party. Teddie has to gain a new motivation partway through by promising Nanako to play with her. So when she dies, the 6-year-old dies in this game, but it's fine. In most of the ending, she pulls through. Out of a sense of loss, he tries to vanish himself out of the world, where you find him in the Velvet Room and inspire him to come back. His shadow is barely even about him, mentioning only that he's in denial about the truth about himself, but none of these threads seem to come together. He wants his world to be peaceful once more, but he drops that. He doesn't know who he is, but he kind of drops that. He made a promise to spend time with Nanako, and that propels him to drastic action, but the culmination of that resolves the answer of who he is, something that doesn't bother him because the scene is also about feeling like he can't contribute as well since Rise got here. The point is that Teddie is a mess. The story doesn't seem to know what exactly to do with him, so they're kind of just giving him a bunch of things on top of the fact that he kind of sexually harasses multiple party members in many different ways. Trying to remove the girls' swimsuits, forcing a kiss onto Kanji, forcing the girls to have a swimsuit competition, pushing Yukiko to kiss and or date him multiple times, etc., and so on. By the way, he's the only party member whose social link progresses through the main plot. He's the only one who has a chance to really grow and change as the story progresses. What do they do with that? Well, outside of the reveal of him being a shadow, a fact that makes him uncertain of himself for like a couple scenes, it does nothing to him. He is the same. Ultimately, Persona 4's story is built around a certain amount of mechanical decision-making. It feels, looking at it like this, like a game with no real sense of cohesion to its own ideas. It wanted to make the dungeon crawling more proactive, so it made the deadline system, but that deadline system strains the story. It wanted party member progression to be at your discretion, to give you better agency, but now the party is kind of at a par, largely witnessing the story happen at you while you solve the mystery yourself. There are a lot of good moments in Persona 4, Nanako's kidnapping, the confrontation in the hospital with Namatame, finding out who the true killer is, the game's system messages trying to stop you from getting to the true ending, but, that's kind of it, right? It's a game that's momentarily interesting, that comes together in isolated moments, but these moments really only feel important because, I don't know, we know Nanako, she's your adorable little cousin, so confronting the man responsible for her death feels weighty, or we've known the true killer because he's been the comedy sidekick for your cop uncle, but barely any of the emotions tied to these scenes have much to do with our party itself. Persona 4 is largely structured around the events themselves. When you're fighting in Kanji's dungeon, it's the Kanji hour. When you're fighting in Rise's dungeon, it's all on her, so there's nothing to adhere to besides the times when the cast is being a bunch of petty teens at each other. It's grating. And if this were just an essay about whether or not I thought Persona 4 was good, I'd leave it at that. But unfortunately, Persona 4 seems to want to say something about society. And like anything that tries to say something about society, the internet behaves totally normal about it, I promise. Part 4 is Persona 4 the Joker. Let's dig into the mystery of the discourse around Persona 4. So, a theme embedded into this game, so much so that the battle theme is literally called Reach Out to the Truth, is pursuing your true self. When these characters get put into the TV, a big dungeon is formed around their repressed insecurities, along with their shadow, a figure that looks like them, but expresses these repressed thoughts brazenly. Each time you go through this, except for one time, sort of, the character has to roundly reject themselves. You fight a big boss fight, and then they either come to accept this part of themselves, gain a persona, and join the team, or they reject it because they're Mitsuo Kubo. And, Nanako. The game kind of implies that she has no inner repressed thoughts because she's a child, even though her social link is about struggling with the feeling that her dad cares more about his work than about her, and she keeps on insisting that things are fine, and I don't know, it's not important, but the core construct here is that there is a philosophical conflict. Who these characters pretend to be, the role they fit into society, is in conflict with who they are. Yosuke pretends that the way he's treated as a pariah in town doesn't get to him, but he secretly is resentful and thinks the town sucks. Chie wants to be Yukiko's dependable friend, but she feels deeply insecure about needing Yukiko around. Yukiko doesn't want to inherit her family's inn. Rise is worried about losing her sense of self as she becomes a commodity as an idol. It's a fine enough idea to work with, and on the face of it, it makes this theme pop. We have a superficial, constructed idea of our world, seeing people as mere representations of their roles in it. High school students, mothers, teachers, delivery men, cops, and so on. And part of reaching out to that ephemeral truth is seeing past our presented selves, seeing what's running underneath, finding out that the delivery guy has been losing his mind, thinking he's saving people by kidnapping them and putting them into the TV world, for example. You can make a really pleasant idea of this game if you know how to cut around the finer details, but these details come crashing back in when you realize that every party member you rescue, everyone who faces their shadow selves and accepts their flaws, slots right back into their role in society. Yukiko is going to inherit the family inn, and she reveals in the TV world that she hates this. She feels trapped, like her life's been predetermined, and she wants her own life. So her social link is about her trying to do that, getting side jobs under the radar to save up money to leave town, only to learn, as the inn's reputation goes under attack, that she loves the inn, and she actually does want to inherit it, and she's satisfied with that being her decision. Now, that's all well and good. It's a decent enough arc on its own, provided, of course, you bother to do it, but things can get complicated fast when, say, instead of having worries about your future or your career, you say, maybe a homosexual. That's when we get Kanji, whose dungeon is a steamy bathhouse. His shadow talks with a lisp. His boss fight looks like this. Atlas, you have a gay in your video game. Oh, but it's okay. He explains that he's not worried he's gay, he's just afraid of rejection, and the girls find it weird that he sews because it's a feminine hobby. He actually isn't gay, and it's good because his sewing hobby is profitable. He makes stuffed animals for a kid, and word gets around, and people like his contribution to society, and at the end of the golden, look at him. He's stopped dyeing his hair and looking like a punk. Conformity. How great. Wouldn't it be weird if they took this one step further? Anyway, Naoto's secretly a woman dressed like a man. So this is Naoto's boss fight. This has been, in various iterations, the heart of the online discourse, as discussing trans identity online has turned into a miserable cesspool. Naoto is a child detective, like literally 15 years old, who helps the police with the serial murder case and suspects her party's involvement runs deeper and puts herself in danger to prove that the case is still ongoing after you catch Mitsuo. In the depths of her dungeon, she is revealed to be a secret woman, and her shadow threatens to strap her down onto the mad science table and medically reconfigure her body in a scene with dialogue that sounds like it could come right out of the mouth of J.K. Rowling and her turfy friends. Not just like the evil mad science trend, but like look at what Yukiko says.
But though I will one day change from a child to an adult, I will never change from a woman to a man.
Do you not like being a girl? Is that why you always dress like a boy?
My sex doesn't fit my ideal image of a detective. Besides, the police department is a male-oriented society. If they had the slightest concrete reason to look down on me, no one would need me anymore.
You don't know that.
Hey, you must know already that what you yearn for isn't to become an adult or become a boy.
Naoto actually doesn't want to be a man, we're told. Hell, someone in our party tells her this. What she's worried about is that no one would respect her as a detective if she's a woman. She's literally giving us Clarice from Silence of the Lambs energy here. It's incredible. So this sequence is cause for some debate. People saying that this is the story kind of coming down as distinctly anti-trans, as the story insists that changing your sex is impossible, and Naoto's misplacing her troubles as a gender thing instead of a hashtag feminism moment. But the detractors largely respond by saying that actually, sometimes people question their gender, their sexuality, and come out of it as cis and straight still. We're actually all just upset because we're insisting that the story has to make her trans when she may just not be, because sometimes people aren't trans, allegedly. Wow. It would be a great argument if Naoto were a real person and not a character in a story about finding your true self. Like, this argument feels so easy to defeat on the face of it that I spent what felt like years personally griping about Persona 4 in general before getting here. But this story is trying to tell you something, as most stories tend to. Like, what does Persona 4 say about society when everyone you run into who feels left out by society eventually realize that they do actually belong in exactly the way society expects them to, except for the two murderers? Like even Namatame gets reintegrated, and he very almost killed a child and kidnapped 4 other high schoolers. Like, look, we are in a society that seems to be tearing itself at the seams here. And the seams are ripping everywhere. Civil unrest, purity politics, the looming environmental crisis that the ones most responsible for are sinking millions of dollars into denialist propaganda. Our society is in fucking shambles on a wide scale. But even down close on a personal level, like, look, it doesn't matter that I spent the last year of my life digging into the depths of my brain and realizing that I don't fit in with society, that I've only been trained to behave with my stupid little scripts to make me palatable, and that these efforts, genuinely trying to pursue my true self, has culminated in very little. Little enough that I had to return to the place where I first felt this disconnect with who I am and who I pretended to be, walking amid the ghosts of my past while normal society has opened itself wide for me. I have a new job, familiar coworkers. I'm back in a place I know well. I'm doing well. I'm done with law school. All of these things should be good steps forward. This should be making me happy, but all I feel is the mask I wear getting pushed back on my face. At the heart of it, there's a real effort in society to push for conformity. As the inclusive tent widens and widens, the common narrative keeps coming back. No, gay people are just like normal people. Trans and non-binary people can be totally normal members of society. No, furries are good because one of them helped make the COVID vaccine. This rests at the heart of my discomfort in this game, that its message, the token progressivism it gives us, the vapid idea that it's okay to want to be a part of society, that you can be a man who likes sewing but you're not gay, that you can be a woman who's a cop but you're not trans. It feels forward-thinking while saying nothing, challenging nothing, and I can see my radical true self, the me that wants to make my art and make the friends I want to make in the community that speaks to me, and struggling with the feeling that my true self doesn't belong. I didn't end up being lucky enough to have an identity that coincidentally fits into what society wants from me, and in the sparse moments where Persona 4 genuinely gestures at a real issue in society, it can only paint true outsiders as murderers and a sick man obsessed with his idea of saving people. They cannot fit into our world, and it makes them evil enough to senselessly murder people, evil enough to kidnap a child. This is what Persona 4 says about society, ultimately. That there are acceptable ways to fit into our world, and that it's cruel to judge people for being a little peculiar, but deep down, the right people fit into this place because they fundamentally uphold the spirit of our community. Yosuke needs to accept that people are just going to be mean to him because his dad's ruining the town's economy. Chie is going to become a cop. Yukiko wants to inherit her family actually. Kanji is actually a straight man with an effeminate hobby. Rise is going to return to her idol job that was causing her to burn out. Naoto is a woman and her gender confusion was actually her fault, thinking that only men could be respected as cops. In the Golden, they introduce Marie, reveal that she's the culmination of every godlike antagonist you face, and if you get the true ending with her, they remake her into a normal member of society. She becomes a fucking weather forecaster. Persona 4 is so obsessed with the inherent moral good of an acceptable society that you can form a literal god into it. This is maybe also why the discourse around it struggles to fully stop, because it goes way beyond Kanji and Naoto. It goes beyond the game's strange reverence of cops, up to and including introducing Adachi as a cop who kills people because it thrills him to have power over others, as wholly aberrant and not at all what a real cop would be like. It's a game that has almost nothing real to say about itself. It gestures vaguely to the idea that people love to gossip, that they all watch TV and are affected entirely by it. A true love letter towards cultivation theory, but that means nothing to you or your journey. You and your companion stand in opposition to the true villain's idea of the world purely symbolically. Your actions represent the thematic counterpoint to the conflict, but you're doing so for disconnected reasons. You've pulled on this thread of finding the serial killer and kept pulling and pulling until it led you to fight Izanami, who's here because she's listened to the wishes of humanity and she believes that humanity desires oblivion, which, like, for the record, is kind of similar to the final boss of Persona 3 and Persona 5. It almost feels like Persona 4 is a game that more or less copied off of Persona 3's homework and kind of changed things around a little and put a yellow filter over it, where Persona 3's villain seems to carry out humanity's perceived desire for oblivion. That makes sense because the story is so deeply connected to how apathy can make people drift apart, how grief and loss and the feeling of being in a world that kind of doesn't care about you can make these desires. And these ideas are literally all over the game constantly. In contrast, Persona 4 is so constantly full of vibrancy and wacky silliness and a few deeply personal and resonant moments that by the time we get to humanity seeking lies over truth, it almost comes out of nowhere. Part of that is a consistency issue. You know, the world responds to the people of Inaba at large until it seems to respond to your conflict personally, unless Nanako's hospitalization was televised. So it feels as the story wraps itself around you and what's significant to you personally, the idea that this is some grand indictment of humanity comes off as forced. The final nail in this coffin is weird, but I want to quickly talk about the other non-party member social links, because there's some really good moments that I feel shouldn't be left off the table in this discussion, where the game gives these characters some really powerful moments of reckoning with themselves. In the middle of a game that's so incurious about our core characters and the story, there is something absolutely potent to Hisano's story about taking care of her husband on his deathbed as he succumbs to dementia, or trying to support Shu as he gets caught cheating on a test, after which his mother yells at him and declares he's not her son, on his birthday, no less. There's, if you want to dig down into this, something truly broken in the heart of the world is described by Persona 4. Yumi's father, a man who left his wife and daughter for many, many years, returns to her life dying, and she's forced to reckon with all of her hatred and all of her despair for this man who had hurt her mom, and her mom who stays with him until the end anyway. Persona 4's best moments, tucked away in the optional content, show us that society is kind of unsustainable. No matter how much the game reveres cops, Dojima's work will only come at the cost of leaving his daughter alone while he works, and these two can cope with this, can try and find more time in between, but this dynamic is absolute. The more the game wants to pretend that society is good, almost by necessity, as an extension of writing a dramatic storyline through these arcs, they cannot help but show that society is failing people, that people cannot help but be met with tragedies, and the only recourse is to extol the virtue of their suffering and their inevitable return to their regular lives. Finding the true killer, Dojima's work partner Adachi involves recognizing that as a detective, Adachi's given so much power and security in this town. He's not seen as suspicious, he has access to firearms, he can bring people in for questioning and talk to them in a private location away from security footage or any kind of oversight. He kills because I guess because he wanted to have sex with Mayumi Yamano and I guess also a high school girl, and he relishes in his own kind of infantile nihilism. He's a cop, he's given power, society trusts him with this power implicitly, and he abuses that trust. There's something to that, right? There's something interesting in being able to point to this and recognize that kind of systemic injustice, but it culminates in nothing. The game looks at all the dark corners of its thinking and has to conclude in the same place. It has to say that Shu loves his mother because she apologized and bought him a birthday cake. It has to point to Adachi and declare him an aberration, a strange, fringe, one-off monster, because the cops are good, responsible, respectable people. It has to be said that while it would be totally okay to be gay or trans, it just so happens that no one is, that everyone will effortlessly sink back into the inherent good of the system as it functions now. The game wants to say that you're penetrating the fog, pushing through oblivion, the need for people to be fed comforting lies. It makes you disobey itself to really push through to get to the very bitter final end, to greet you with photographic proof of how inescapable our roles really are. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Bees the One, Caitlin Fisher, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Naraya the Redmarked, Professor Bopper, St. Rawberry, Thomas Volpez, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.